Hi, everyone. It's Christy here from Conservation Careers. I'm the head of engagement at CC, and Nick's handed over the reins of the podcast to me to host a special episode with a guest from my own country, Canada. So can you picture yourself rescuing, rehabilitating, or even releasing individuals from a critically endangered species in the wild? Or translocating wolves from Canada to be released in Yellowstone National Park in the US? Those are just two examples of the work of Dr. Malcolm McAdie, a Canadian wildlife veterinarian who's worked with species such as wolves, snakes, bald eagles, and critically endangered Vancouver Island marmots. As a wildlife vet, Malcolm works with the Marmot Recovery Foundation, where he oversees all of the captive breeding and marmot care and rescuing and releasing marmots. He also provides specialized care to all the animals at the North Island Wildlife Recovery Association, among many other exciting projects. In this episode, Malcolm shares his career journey, the highlights of being a wildlife vet, and the importance of sharing conservation success stories. He also explains some of the keys to his own career success, including being flexible, being available, and making connections that led to work. This is the third episode of a new format of the podcast, where we invited members of our community into the recording as an audience and invited them to ask questions of Malcolm once the microphones were turned off. If you'd like to be in the audience of our podcast recordings, please check out our Conservation Pathway program and come along. We'd love to have you here. So now let's hand over to Malcolm to learn about his exciting career as a wildlife vet and how he crafted a career that he loves.
Okay, so my name is Malcolm McAdie. I'm a veterinarian based out of Nanaimo, British Columbia. And for the last 30 odd years, I've been working as a wildlife veterinarian. So that has included all sorts of different experiences throughout BC, so British Columbia, Alaska, the continental United States, Mexico, Japan, Denmark. And the biggest emphasis right now in my work is actually on the recovery of an endangered species that's endemic to Vancouver Island. It's the Vancouver Island marmot. So I am the project veterinarian for that conservation project. And also I manage a breeding facility for the marmots. So we have quite an active captive breeding and reintroduction program for them.
Amazing.
So I wear many hats, but that's sort of the big emphasis right now.
Yeah. So neat to hear how your work's taken you basically all over the world. Yeah. And really exciting to feature an endemic species from Western Canada and spotlight them for conservationists all over the world too.
Yeah, and you know, it's just one of those fortuitous things. It was just in my backyard essentially as well, so it all kind of fell into place for me.
So will you tell us the story of how it got started and how you sort of moved into wildlife vetting?
Well, I guess not to make too long a story, but I was a very geeky kid. I was at a young age, I was a birder. And about 20 minutes from my home, I grew up in a place called Sherwood Park, Alberta. About 20 minutes away, there was the Alberta Game Farm, which was this collection of animals, which included like lowland gorillas, tigers, camels, wide variety of African hoofstock. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get a job there as a teenager. And it was really ridiculously hard work. It was sort of a farm situation. The owner had very extreme demands on his staff, but I just loved it. And, you know, like I have sort of experiences like after hours, the large male gorilla suffered from constipation. And so we used to go up after hours to give him a glass And there's actually two other gorillas, so they'd all get a glass, but they get a glass of milk and prune juice to alleviate the male gorilla's constipation. And so having those experiences at an early age, like there's never any doubt that I wanted to be a veterinarian, but like not just veterinarian, conventional veterinarian. I really wanted to work with those sorts of animals. Well, we can sort of get into that a bit later, but they're just so intriguing to me. So after my second attempt, I made it into the vet school. And, when I graduated, the only real opportunities for veterinarians, and unless you went into the academic world, and I didn't really have the marks to get, I was in the upper echelon of veterinary students. The only conventional opportunities were in that sort of typical veterinary practice. So I did mixed animal practice, and then I did small animal practice, and I sort of bounced around through a variety of different clinics over time. And ultimately, we ended up on Vancouver Island off the west coast of British Columbia. And I worked at a practice, mixed animal practice. There are opportunities to volunteer at a local recovery center. So I took advantage of that, and I, became very good friends with the people running that facility. But there's also biologists who wanted veterinarians to go out and help them on a couple different projects. One was actually surgically implanting radio transmitters into the Vancouver Island marmots. And the other project was actually going out and collaring cougars. Vancouver Island has a very dense population of cougars. So we would go out with the houndsmen. They would tree the cougar, we dart it, and then collar it. And at that time, we were doing a few things like screening them for infectious disease and also testing new drugs to immobilize them as well. And I just figured, gee, I'd much rather be doing this than my day job. And so I made the decision to not be a contract veterinarian at veterinary clinic, but be a relief or locum veterinarian. And so that allowed me the flexibility to take advantage of other opportunities. So I could sort of dictate my schedule a bit. So if an opportunity came up to go and implant those marmots, or if an opportunity came up to go and collar those cougars, I was available. And just through attrition, the other veterinarians that were involved in those projects, they had, very tight restrictions on their time, and I didn't. So that started things. And then my first paying wildlife opportunity was actually to provide humane eradication or control of Virginia opossums, which have been released onto one of the islands to the east of Vancouver Island. And then I had an opportunity to help with the translocation of wolves from British Columbia down to Yellowstone in Idaho. So just from that initial experiences and being available, and through word of mouth, I was able to take advantage of more and more opportunities. And so after a few years, I was able to say, I didn't need to be a relief veterinarian anymore. For other practitioners, I could solely dedicate myself to these different wildlife projects. So that's sort of the long and short of it.
That's so neat. It sounds like just the being flexible and sort of consciously making a decision to introduce more flexibility and really opened up opportunity for you.
Certainly that really was the key, but I think it was really that making that jump, making that decision that, okay, I know that, there's going to be some lean times ahead, but, the experiences of working on those cougars or going out to the subalpine meadows where the marmots were, those experiences were worth it to me, so that, it trumped whatever I would be making as a salary.
Yeah.
So, and I think that was sort of the tipping point, is making that decision that the experiences are more important in the long term than just building, sort of a structured life with, with 9 to 5 sort of existence. So, once I realized that, you just sort of roll with the punches from there and cross your fingers and hope that there's enough work to keep you going.
Yeah. That's really neat. Yeah. We do a lot of sort of self-reflection exercises and looking at your values and like really getting clear on what's the biggest priority for me, and everyone's a bit different.
Yeah.
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 So for people who are thinking about, going into wildlife vetting, can you just run through like what's involved? What do you do day to day? What's your work like? No small question.
It's so variable because I think like the thing is that when you're sort of doing this kind of work, there's the veterinary aspects to it. So, for example, at the North Island Wildlife Recovery Association, the wildlife rehab facility that I do work for, we, as much as my schedule now permits, we go and we have rounds where we look at the the wildlife cases that have come in, and we also before we get too far into the summer, there's also a bunch of ambassador non-releasable animals that they have there as well. So we want to make sure that we get hands-on and give them physical examinations, make sure that they're healthy. So that's sort of part of it. With the marmots, we're actually sort of on, this is sort of the calm before the storm. So our season, well, right now we're actually anxiously watching the marmots that we have up at our facility, because this is the time that they're actually giving birth to their pups. So they come out of hibernation, and the first thing they do is they breed, and they have a gestation period of 32 days. So right now is the time. So we're just watching that, but they're also, this is sort of the unglamorous part of the job. They're also producing lots of feces. They go from 0 to 60 in no time. So we've got to get the feces out of the facility, and it's still surrounded by snow. And we also have to get food up to them as well. So part of my job this afternoon will actually be to go up and haul some pellets up to the facility, so bags of pellets, and remove the waste as well. So get it, it's bagged right now, and it's going in my truck, and people will use it as compost. So in another couple of weeks, though, we are going to be preparing the marmots that we have identified for release back to the wild. Because they're a hibernating species, they have this profound weight change. So we can't use conventional collars. So what we actually do is we surgically implant radio transmitters into the marmots. So that's the other part of my day to day, and the next week or so is just getting everything ready, because we are actually at the point where we're going to be releasing over the course of a couple of weeks about 50 marmots back to the wild. So each of them requires a surgery. So once we've released those marmots, the rest of the summer is really geared towards going out into the field and trapping and surgically implanting radio transmitters into wild marmots. So, a large part of that is getting helicoptered out to these sites. And, it's really kind of gratifying because, we're going to be working at a lot of sites where there weren't previously marmots. They'd actually been extirpated. And so these are the descendants of marmots that we've actually released to those sites previously. So that's sort of the summer on the marmots, which sort of, dominates everything. But a couple of weeks ago, I was actually in the Okanagan, so the central dry valley of British Columbia, and I was implanting snakes with radio transmitters.
Wow.
So we were implanting rattlesnakes and gopher snakes and western yellow-bellied racers as well. So that I was doing that, and prior to that, I was spending periods of time up at our Marmot facility, shoveling snow, maintaining the access. So it's quite variable, really, in terms of what I do.
The far opposite of the 9 to 5.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How exciting. Will you just, because our audience is all over the world, will you just say a little bit about marmots and what makes them so special?
Well, I think marmots are intelligent. They're highly social rodents. They live in an extreme way. These are animals that hibernate for 7 months of the year without eating. And then they have 5 months to do or accomplish everything within their life history, like, putting on weight, breeding, the pups need to grow. And so I think that, they're, I guess it's not very scientific, but they're awfully cute and they have personalities. And I think the fact that they're endangered as well, there's 15 species of marmots worldwide. They're pretty much all found in the Northern Hemisphere, like in North America and Eurasia. But the Vancouver marmot is critically endangered. And I think that sort of creates a bit of a bond for me as well. Like, we were at the point back in 2003 where there was only, at the end of the 2003 field season, we only knew of 22 wild individuals. So that's how low their numbers dropped. We were able, over the next decade, through captive breeding and reintroduction, to bring their numbers up to about 350. And then the powers that be said, well, you guys are pretty much finished. And we weren't. So the numbers slowly dropped. So they gave us sort of a second chance to build up the numbers again. But right now we're probably looking at between 200 and probably 250, somewhere in there right now. Yeah. So the numbers are still good. Like, we still, it's much better than 22, or we say less than 30 in 2003. So we still got a lot of flexibility. And actually yesterday, like, what we do is we have helicopter flights that go out to these location where the marmots are, and we actually supplement feed them in the spring, just to increase their body condition, potentially increase their reproduction. And when they're flying out in Strathcona Park, which is this huge park on the central part of Vancouver Island, where we've actually been able to reestablish the marmots, they found a new site that we didn't know about. So that, the descendants of the marmots that we put in there had been able to, move to a different location and successfully hibernate, because they, what they saw was they're flying along and they just saw the emergence tunnel through the snow. So the marmots, they're underground, they're hibernating, and then they have to dig out through the snow, and they come out and they start moving around, and they drag a whole bunch of dirt around with them as well. So you can actually see that from quite a distance away. Like, an American biologist was saying he could see the hoary marmot emergent holes, from several kilometers away. So when you're in the air, like you're flying around, you see this, it's just this distinct blemish on the snow. So that, and then they got a picture of the marmot as well. So it's pretty gratifying.
Wow. Yeah, to be part of bringing them back from what I think you said, 22, 23 individuals to what it is today. That's incredible. Yeah.
Well, I've said this several times, it's like, but, working on an endangered species is kind of like having your heart slowly pulled out of your chest. Like, there's sort of the ups and the downs, and like our first release of marmots from captivity, we did an experimental release, and we released 4 of them to a site, and they did well for a month and a half. And then over the course of about 24 hours. 3 of them were killed by a cougar. And so, what do? You just keep, you learn from your experiences and you just keep going. And, it's, and I think like the other thing, obviously people are sort of invested in this because they're interested in conservation. And I think that's one thing. The messages and the news stories that you see every day, it seems almost overwhelming. And yet when you work on an endangered species like this, on a project like this, it becomes a bit more manageable. Like at least, you can have an effect on something. Obviously, I've said this many times too, there's actually a marmot biologist, Ken Armitage, who passed away, but he used to be asked, well, he worked on yellow-bellied marmots, and it's like, well, marmots, what are they good for? And he would say, I don't know, what are you good for? And I think that the thing is that, all these species are important. And I think that at the end of the day, if you can say, you've had some impact and or some positive influence, I think that's really a good thing. And the fact that the Marmot project, so, it's the Marmot Recovery Foundation, the fact that over 70% of the support comes from the general public, it means that marmots are important to people. And, you carry that in the back of your mind as well. Like, I used to think that we would be able to solve the entire problem of the marmots in terms of, getting them up to a sustainable level. I thought, well, we do that within a period of a decade or so. And yet you kind of realize that you're not really just solving the problem. You're sort of being handed a baton in a race, and you carry it, and then you hopefully hand it over to the next generation of people, and hopefully you've bettered the situation. But you have to sort of work with that as well. Like you're doing something that might not be completely ended by the end of your career, but hopefully you've been able to sort of bring that forward and help. So
yeah. Off of that, how much does education, like educating and sharing with the public, play a role in what you do?
Oh, I think that's really important. I think that getting the message out, and I think the message that conservation can be successful as well. There's so many stories about the plight of species and the declines, and I think that if that is the prevailing message, I think it's just easy for people to say, well, that's not really worth investing in because it's just, everything's going into decline. So I think that the more you educate people about what you're doing and the marmots themselves, I think the more they become invested. And I think that that's the one thing that I thought was really interesting. I did a master's project, a master's thesis about 5 years ago. I finished, and my professor, my supervisor, he said that like when he started his career, he'd always have people who'd grown up at, when they were kids, they would have that experience of getting like tadpoles in a jar and watching them morph into to frogs. He said, I have so many students now, and none of them have that experience as well. So I think that education is really important because of the fact that people need to have exposure to marmots or to other species, because I think that connection is becoming less and less for people. So.
Yeah, it's like as we become more disconnected in our societies, it's coming back to that, you can't love or care for what you don't know.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I think, I guess that's the one thing that, like a place like North Island as well. Like there's a huge, so the North Island Wildlife Recovery Association, there's a huge educational component that goes into that because people need to see, the plight of the animals and what risk they're at. But the other thing is that there's a certain segment of animals that can't be released, but their temperament makes them amenable to being these ambassador animals as well. And people can see footage of bald eagles, on TV, but to have that sort of close experience seeing one, especially for kids, I think that's really important.
Yeah. When I arrived at the event where I first saw your talk, I thought, oh gosh, a public bald eagle release, shouldn't this eagle be being released privately by, 2 or 3 people? But I was blown away by that event, and how it engaged people and made them part of that process and really did create that connection. So yeah, I can see there's a lot of power in that.
It really is amazing. I mean, I'm not even sure of how many people are, like, it's in the hundreds, definitely, the people who go to that release. And and you can probably relate to this because of your mom, like the experience of the person doing the release as well. Like that is, quite a profound experience, right? Having, like holding that eagle and then releasing it. So, yeah.
I think that will go, I was just going to say, I think that will go down as one of, her most memorable days.
Yeah.
I didn't mention that at the beginning, but my mom had the honor of releasing a bald eagle. Yeah.
Yeah. And from my perspective, when so we capture up the eagle and we do that initial exam to make sure that it's, it's ready to go. And I always, with so many people around, I just sort of have to sort of be somewhere else because I worry about how it's going to go. Right?
Fair
But
enough.
they, like they've been doing it for years and they always go quite smoothly. So it's, yeah. But, and I can certainly relate to it because the one thing about wildlife rehab, sadly, is that there's a lot of cases that don't have a positive outcome. And, animals that die in your care or the ones that have to be euthanized. And so when you have that experience of releasing an animal and you're confident that it's, stands a good chance of surviving, it really hopefully makes up for the rest of the work that goes into that. It's really good feeling, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you shared, some of the highlights and the lowlights of doing the work you do. Do you have a favorite wildlife encounter?
Oh, gee. A favorite, it's funny because I've been involved in a lot of different projects, and I can't think of, well, I can think of only one that, the main researcher was kind of a quirky person. But other than that, they've all been really, I can't think of any that I really haven't enjoyed, or maybe, because of the circumstances, I haven't enjoyed them at the time, but when you reflect back on it, it's like, that was really cool. So, I mean, obviously like the marmots are, just such a big part of my life, but I would say that one of the species that I've worked on quite a bit is the harlequin duck. It's this duck that spends winters on the coast, and it migrates sort of mostly in an east-west kind of fashion to nest on mountainous streams. And so, I've been up in Alaska, and the goal was to actually get liver biopsies from harlequin ducks, so anesthetize them, get a small sample of their liver to monitor the effects of the Exxon Valdez spill.
Okay.
And that, and they actually monitored these ducks over a 20-year period. And it's only after 20 years that they found that the residual effects of the Exxon Valdez oil was not affecting them. So I've also been able to work on them in coastal British Columbia, the Rocky Mountains, so in Alberta, Montana, Wyoming, and Washington State. And like it's just like these little ducks that you sort of, what we were doing is with those is implanting satellite transmitters so they can be tracked. And so you're sort of learning about the lives of these little ducks and seeing all this really neat country. Like we made sort of like a trip in an RV around implanting them one year, and also been able to do that. Like we implanted some of them in Yellowstone National Park as well. So it's just the Harlequin ducks, like this, probably 600-gram duck, and you realize where they live and how they live is pretty extraordinary. But I've also been able to work on like wolverines and badgers, and again, surgically implanting radio transmitters in those guys as well, river otters. I think it sounds kind of funny that I think it's just all so cool, and the experiences really have been quite meaningful. Yeah. So I can't I think I can't think of one specifically that it stands out amongst the rest.
I love that. Well, it sounds like you've hit the jackpot, and like a lot of diversity and adventure in your career, and just being able to experience so many different species and so many different beautiful landscapes.
And I think sometimes, I mean, it's what but it's also who as well. And a large part of it, and I still do it, but you make yourself available, and if you do a good job and you're accommodating, that gets around. Like there's not that many biologists, and so those connections you make really allow everything to kind of flow.
Yeah. So. Is there any other advice you'd give to someone who is considering working as a wildlife vet?
Well, so I think we've already touched on it. So you give yourself maximal flexibility of schedule if you can. Make yourself available to as much as you can, and I would say part of that is seeking out opportunities for yourself as well. Yeah. I think even if you're in private practice, I think those opportunities to work on unusual species is important. So when I was in private practice, I certainly, birds and reptiles were certainly part of what I did as well. Yeah. And so I think that private practice also gives an opportunity for you to increase, your clinical skills, your surgical skills. So I think that all those experiences really, are additive. So, just make yourself as flexible and versatile as you can, and really, work on those basic clinical and surgical skills as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear no experience is sort of wasted, like building up skills and experience is always needed. And then the flexibility plus connections.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing on some of the wildlife projects too, I've been involved, and part of the expectation was that you would also say help with the trapping of the animals. Like, for example, on the Wolverine project, they'd have sort of like a 200 kilometers of traps, and you would have to get on a snow machine and check at least a portion of those traps.
Mhm.
And so there are other veterinarians involved in that project, and they just sort of sat and waited for the wolverines to be trapped, and then they'd help. And I think that being versatile and, you know, being supportive of the biologists, I think that's really important, and be willing to sort of do those experiences of, like they were actually, like they were trapping the wolverines with beaver carcasses, right? So you'd have to get out your axe, and you have to cut up the beaver, and like you'd go out on your snow machine and you'd be checking traps, and you get stuck and you have to dig yourself out. And I think that if you can sort of take all that and you show that you're part of the team, I think that adds to your value as well.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing is that I think as veterinarians, we're sort of put in the position of feeling that we have to provide all the answers, but we're really not providing all the answers. We are just providing support to biologists in a lot of cases. And so I think, I sort of had the legacy of previous veterinarians who felt that they're somehow superior because of their training and everything to the biologists, but they're not. They're really complementary in a lot of ways. And I think that there's a great deal that, you can learn from biologists as well. And so I think the more you sort of approach it as sort of a team aspect rather than a hierarchy, I think the better off you'll be. And certainly, if you're just easy to get along with, you're in field situations and you're not complaining about the food or the circumstances, because sometimes there's a challenge to that. If you're okay with that, then you'll be asked to that project again or to other projects. But the one thing that I like a lot of these field camps, people are really invested in their food. And I've been in field camps where they they sort of have like a communal dinner. And that's the one thing that I never really learned is how to cook. So I think that I wish I could be part of the team in terms of preparing something special like they are doing, but generally I just end up washing the dishes. So learn to
which
cook,
is probably
maybe,
highly valued also.
Yeah, that's right. So so maybe learn to cook for a group of people. I don't know.
Yeah, I love it. It's really interesting because we just did a review of, we tried to map out the different roles within the conservation sector, being a big sector. And something that stood out was that so many employers across all of them look for flexibility in employees, which kind of resonated, kind of links with what you're saying. Like just being willing to try different things, get in there, help where you can, collaborate.
No, I think that's really true. And I think like the other thing is, it's very unstructured at times. I mean, we've had some impossibly long field days just because of circumstances. And under those circumstances, you can't really just say, okay, well, I'm done. It's 5 o'clock, I'm done. And so I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
Like you just have to be able to put in those long days as required. And I know some people don't like that, but it's just sort of the nature of the work sometimes.
Fair enough. So switching gears a little bit, I want to just wrap up on a big question. What do you think's missing in conservation? What would make the biggest difference?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is the resources available. Like I think a lot of projects really are so used to operating on a shoestring. But I think that the most important thing is really, and it actually, I mean, it's there. the main resource are the people driving the conservation efforts. And, like, it's funny because, like, one of the members of the Marmot recovery team, he was a government official, and he sat on a lot of recovery teams. And I asked him one day, like, you sit on all these recovery teams, and it must just be a tale of doom and gloom. Like, don't you get tired of it? And then I asked him, like, what really makes a recovery team go? And he said that the main thing that makes a recovery team go is having people who are invested in the cause. And I think you have to look at it as that, like, like hauling, like shoveling snow for the marmots, or hauling, waste down the mountain or pellets up to the facility. I mean, it's not very glamorous, but I sort of took the approach that, whatever needs to be done for the marmots, I'll do it. And if there's nobody available to do it, I will do it. So I think it's there. I think it's really just, like, people making a commitment and being invested in whatever they're working on. Like, I remember being at a conference, and it was on endangered species, and there's these people who are working on the Banff Springs snail. And it's a species, it's quite cryptic, it's very localized, and it's one of these things where it sort of is in a hot spring, and the wrong contaminant in the water could wipe out the entire population. And these people had, they had a captive breeding program, and they'd done all these studies, and I walked out of there thinking, thank goodness someone cares about the Banff Springs snail. So I think that's really, I don't think it's lacking, but I think it's people realizing that they can have an effect on endangered species or on conservation, and working towards that. And during like, for me, I kind of knew I wanted a career, but it wasn't really a career, it just became a career. And I think that, if you work for the good of wildlife in whatever capacity, and you're able to move forward, I think that that's probably that enthusiasm and interest is really probably your greatest asset that you have, and that will play out in some way in the world of conservation.
Amazing. Well, I think that's the perfect note to sort of hit pause on for now. Thanks so much, Malcolm, for sharing your story and your experience, and kind of inviting us into what your career is like.
Oh, well, thanks for listening. I do appreciate it.
Where can people go if they want to find out more about your work or marmots or the wildlife you?
Well, I would say, like, for the marmots, the Marmot Recovery Foundation website. So it's marmots.org. And certainly, like, there's a lot of information. It actually has current information, so what's happening on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of historical information on the Marmot Recovery Project as well. Other than that, I mean, I guess, like, a lot of what I've done is sort of on Google, but I don't really have it all in sort of a single site. I'm not very well connected with, like, social media or anything like that. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll do some Google searching, and we can pull some of the resources together. I know there's a few videos out there that are pretty neat to watch and get a glimpse into what you do.
Well, it's funny because, like, when you work with marmots, it's kind of like you got this popular friend, and by extension, you become popular too. And and like they say, like, your work shouldn't really define you, but to me, it's I don't think I could extract myself from my work, and I don't really consider it to be work, though. Most of the time, I will when I'm shoveling snow and stuff. It's work, but like, there are times where you're, say you're out in this subalpine meadow in Strathcona Park, and you've been flown in by helicopter, and you're just watching marmots. I mean, what could be better?
It sounds like you found work that's just an extension of your passion. Sounds incredible. Well, thank you
feel pretty
very much
lucky.
again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.